Today, we're exploring the worst weapons ever made during World War II, machines that promised victory but delivered failure on the battlefield. Starting with number 1, Boy's Anti-Tank Rifle, United Kingdom, 1937. Issued to British infantry from 1937, the Boy's anti-tank rifle fired a large 0.55-inch armor-piercing round from a bolt-action rifle platform, a design that could reliably penetrate the thin armor of early 1930s tankettes and light tanks it was conceived against. Technically, the weapon's penetration figures, adequate on paper against 1937-era armor, simply failed to keep pace with the armor thickness increases German tank designers introduced by 1940, so the Boy's rifle could no longer reliably defeat even the frontal plate of a Panzer III. Practically, infantry facing German armor during the Battle of France and the North African campaign found that hits which should have disabled a tank often failed to penetrate at all, leaving the firer exposed at close range with no effect to show for it. The rifle's enormous recoil, a frequently documented complaint in training and unit reports, also caused bruising and flinching that degraded aim on follow-up shots, undermining the accuracy the weapon needed at its already marginal effective range. Soldiers carrying the roughly 16-kilogram weapon into combat resented both its weight and its dwindling usefulness as German armor improved. By 1942, it was being phased out in favor of the PIAT, its service record standing as a clear case of a weapon specification aging out of relevance faster than doctrine could replace it. Number 2, Breda BA-65, Italy, 1936. The Breda BA-65 entered Italian service in 1936, built around a bulky Fiat or imported Pratt & Whitney radial engine housed in a deep, barrel-shaped fuselage. That shape existed to fit a large power plant and internal bomb bay, but pushed the cockpit high and back, giving the pilot almost no downward view during the low-level strafing runs the aircraft was designed to fly. Technically, this meant a pilot attacking ground targets in North Africa could not see the very terrain or gunfire he was diving toward until seconds before impact. Practically, this translated into pilots misjudging altitude on attack runs and flying into small arms fire they never spotted rising toward them. Ground crews also fought a supply problem. Many airframes relied on French-built engines, and once Italy's access to those parts was cut, squadrons cannibalized wrecks to keep others flying. Pilots dreaded low-level sorties specifically because the aircraft's blind spot made every attack a guess. Losses against British desert forces climbed through 1940 and 1941, and by then most surviving BA.65s had been quietly withdrawn to rear areas. The lesson engineers drew afterward was blunt. An attack aircraft that cannot see its own target is not an attack aircraft at all. Number 3, T-35 Heavy Tank, Soviet Union, 1935. The Soviet T-35, in limited production from 1935, carried 5 turrets bristling with 2 cannon and multiple machine guns, an interwar concept meant to project firepower in every direction simultaneously. Technically, coordinating 5 separate turret crews under a single tank commander proved nearly unmanageable. Communication inside the vehicle relied on primitive signal lights and shouted orders, and the sheer 45-ton weight strained the engine and transmission, even on peacetime parade routes. Practically, when Germany invaded in June 1941, most of the roughly 48 T-35s still in service never reached combat at all. Unit records show the majority broke down, ran out of fuel, or became stuck during road marches toward the front and were abandoned by their own crews rather than lost to enemy fire. Its enormous length and height also made it an unmissable target for German anti-tank guns and dive bombers on the rare occasions it did appear. Crews described exhausting maintenance schedules that consumed more operational time than any actual fighting. Of the small production run, essentially none survived meaningful combat engagement. The T-35's paperwork trail, breakdown reports outnumbering combat reports many times over, documents how impressive specifications collapse once a vehicle cannot reliably move, let alone fight. Number 4, Number 74 ST Grenade Sticky Bomb, United Kingdom, 1940. Rushed into production in 1940, when Britain faced a severe shortage of dedicated anti-tank weapons after Dunkirk, the Number 74 ST Grenade wrapped a glass sphere of nitroglycerin-based explosive in a strong adhesive coating, designed so a soldier could hurl it against a tank's hull and have it stick before detonating via a short fuse. The technical idea addressed a real gap, close-range armor defense for infantry, with almost no anti-tank guns left after the Dunkirk evacuation, but the adhesive coating proved nearly as effective at sticking to the user's own uniform, webbing, or hands as to enemy armor. Practically, soldiers training with the device recorded numerous accidents where the sticky casing adhered to clothing or equipment during the throw, and any mud, dust, or moisture on the target tank's hull, common in real combat, caused the grenade to fail to adhere at all and simply bounce off before exploding harmlessly or dangerously close to the thrower. Troops who carried it described genuine fear of the weapon itself, independent of the enemy, given documented cases of premature adhesion during handling. Training commands eventually issued specific handling protocols to reduce accidents. Its service record, more feared by its own users than trusted against the enemy, made it one of the war's clearest examples of an emergency solution outrunning its own safety testing. Number 5. Fiat CR-42 Falco, Italy, 1939. Italy fielded the Fiat CR-42 Falco from 1939, a biplane built with fixed landing gear and an open cockpit at a time when Britain, Germany, and Japan had already moved to enclosed monoplane fighters. Technically, the biplane layout gave excellent turning radius and low wing loading, genuinely useful in a slow-speed dogfight, but it capped top speed well below 440 km per hour, roughly 100 km per hour slower than a Hurricane, and far behind a Spitfire. Practically, this speed gap meant Falco pilots could not choose when to fight. Opposing fighters could simply refuse a turning engagement, climb above the CR-42, and dive back through with superior closing speed before the Italian pilot could react. During the brief Italian participation in the Battle of Britain and later over Malta and North Africa, Falco squadrons suffered losses disproportionate to the damage they inflicted because agility only matters if the enemy is forced to get close. Pilots who had trained for classic maneuvering combat found themselves unable to force that kind of fight at all. With no faster replacement fully available, Italy kept flying the Falco years past its usefulness, a biplane answering a monoplane's war with the wrong questions. Number 6. Char B1 bis, France, 1935. The Char B1 bis, in French service from 1935, mounted a hull-fixed 75mm gun for infantry support and a turret-mounted 47mm anti-tank gun, giving it, on paper, formidable dual-role firepower and armor up to 60mm. The technical flaw sat inside the turret. One man served as commander, gunner, and loader simultaneously for the 47mm gun. A workload later analysis estimated could triple engagement time compared to German tanks with a dedicated gunner and loader. Practically, this meant that in the fast, fluid armor battles of May, June 1940, a Char B1 bis might identify a threat correctly, but still lose engagement simply because the commander could not lay, load, and fire quickly enough before the enemy tank maneuvered or fired first. Fuel range compounded the problem. A roughly 150-kilometer operational radius left units stranded mid-battle during the chaotic retreat, and several intact tanks were captured or destroyed only because they had run dry rather than been outfought. Crews respected the armor, which genuinely resisted many German rounds, but recognized that armor alone could not offset a turret crew doing 3 jobs at once. The Char B1 bis remains a documented example of firepower and protection undermined by crew ergonomics rather than metallurgy. Number 7. Nambu Type 14 Pistol, Japan, 1925. Standard sidearm for Japanese officers throughout the war, the Nambu Type 14 used a comparatively weak recoil spring and tight chamber tolerances that engineers had designed for controlled factory conditions rather than sustained field use. Technically, the pistol's firing pin was prone to breakage, and its magazine had no reliable hold-open feature, so users often did not realize the weapon was empty until a trigger pull produced nothing. Practically, Japanese officers in the field, particularly in the humid conditions of the Pacific Theater, reported frequent failures to feed or fire, with dust and moisture aggravating the pistol's already tight internal tolerances, exactly the environment much of the war was fought in. Its recoil spring also weakened faster than comparable American or German pistols, degrading reliability. Further, the longer a weapon stayed in continuous service without replacement parts, which grew scarce as Japan's supply lines collapsed later in the war. Officers who depended on it as a last resort personal weapon understood its reputation for jamming at the worst moments, a concern documented in period accounts from Pacific Island fighting. Unlike a rifle or machine gun, where stoppage cost firepower, a sidearm failure at close-quarters combat could cost an officer his life directly. The Type 14's record shows how tolerances built for peacetime manufacturing convenience became a lethal liability once exposed to real combat conditions. Number 8. Bolton Paul Defiant, United Kingdom, 1937. Introduced in 1937, the Boulton-Paul Defiant carried a four-gun Boulton-Paul power turret behind the pilot, and critically, no forward-firing guns at all. The technical reasoning was sound in theory: attack bombers from an unexpected quarter-astern angle where their own defensive fire was weakest. The practical failure was immediate once German fighter pilots studied the silhouette during the Battle of Britain and realized the turret could not traverse into the aircraft's own forward or lower forward arc. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 pilot who approached head-on or climbed from below faced no return fire whatsoever. Squadron 141 discovered this the hard way in July 1940, losing several aircraft in a single engagement before surviving crews understood what was happening. Gunners, seated in an isolated rotating turret, could not bail out easily if the hydraulics jammed under battle damage, adding a second layer of crew risk beyond the tactical flaw. Losses mounted fast enough that Fighter Command pulled Defiants from daylight operations within weeks, reassigning them to night interception, where bombers rarely evaded from below. The paperwork behind that reassignment amounted to an admission that the turret concept, however clever, had one fatal blind spot the enemy found almost immediately. Number 9. Goliath Track Mine, Germany, 1942. Germany fielded the Goliath track mine from 1942, a small remote-controlled demolition vehicle carrying up to 100 kilograms of explosive and guided by a spooling control cable, intended to destroy bunkers, bridges, or tanks without exposing a soldier to close-range demolition work. Technically, the cable guidance system was cheap and simple to manufacture. Roughly 7,500 units were built across the war, but that same simplicity was its undoing. The wire was thin, exposed, and easily severed by small arms fire, shrapnel, or rough terrain, instantly disabling the vehicle mid-approach. Practically, defenders at Anzio and during the Warsaw Uprising learned quickly that a single well-aimed rifle shot at the cable or the vehicle itself neutralized an expensive weapon before it reached its target. Its slow speed, roughly 10 kilometers per hour, gave defenders ample time to react once a Goliath was spotted crossing open ground. Operators guiding it from cover remained tactically exposed during the approach, undercutting the original safety rationale of keeping soldiers back from a blast. Combat effectiveness proved low relative to cost and production effort. The Goliath's record shows an idea ahead of its enabling technology: remote warfare attempted before control systems existed robust enough to survive the battlefield they were sent into. Number 10. Type 95 Hago, Japan, 1935. Japan's Type 95 Hago light tank, in service from 1935, carried a 37mm gun and armor of only 6 to 12mm, specifications calibrated against the light infantry resistance Japanese forces expected in China and early Pacific operations. Technically, this armor could not stop American bazooka rounds, anti-tank rifle grenades, or even concentrated heavy machine gun fire at close range, a gap that widened dramatically once Hago crews met American M4 Shermans on islands such as Tarawa and Saipan from 1943 onward. Practically documented island battle accounts describe Hago tanks destroyed within moments of engaging American armor, their 37mm shells failing to penetrate Sherman frontal plate, while Sherman's 75mm rounds went through the Hago with ease. Japanese armor doctrine, built around infantry support tactics from a 1930s China campaign, offered little guidance for facing a peer-armored opponent, and crew training had not adapted to the threat. Numerous Hago losses occurred in the opening minutes of American assaults, sometimes before the tank fired a shot that mattered. Across the island-hopping campaign, these losses steadily eroded Japan's already thin armored reserves. The Hago's failure was less a flaw in its original 1930s specification than proof of how fast a design becomes obsolete once the technological pace of the opposing side outstrips it entirely. Number 11. Breda 30 light machine gun, Italy, 1930. Standard issue with Italian infantry from 1930 through the entire war. The Breda 30 fed ammunition not from a detachable magazine, but from a fixed, hinge box that had to be manually reloaded with an oiling clip, a mechanism engineers chose to simplify manufacturing tolerances, but which introduced a chain of field problems no factory test anticipated. Technically, the oiled cartridges attracted sand and dust in North Africa, and the weapon's tight tolerances meant even light fouling could cause a stoppage mid-engagement. Practically, this made the Breda 30 spectacularly unreliable in desert conditions, where Italian infantry units in Libya and Egypt reported frequent jams during exactly the sustained firefights a squad automatic weapon existed to win. Its low-capacity feed system, holding only 20 rounds, also meant gunners had to reload far more often than crews operating British Bren guns or German MG-34s, breaking suppressive fire at critical moments. Soldiers carrying it into combat described dreading the weapon's tendency to seize at the worst possible time, sometimes forcing a squad to fight without automatic fire support entirely. Unit after-action reports from the Desert Campaign repeatedly cite Breda stoppages as a contributing factor in lost engagements. The Breda 30's failure traces directly to a manufacturing shortcut, oiled ammunition, and a fixed feed box that never accounted for the environment Italian soldiers actually fought in. Number 12. Ferry Battle, United Kingdom, 1937. The ferry battle in RAF service from 1937 paired a single Rolls-Royce Merlin engine with a bomber airframe built to carry a pilot, navigator, and gunner plus bomb load, a combination that technically overloaded the available horsepower. This left the aircraft slow, with a lone rearward machine gun as its only defense, unable to outrun fighters or fight them off. The operational consequence arrived on May 14, 1940, when battles were sent against German pontoon bridges over the Meuse near Sedan with minimal fighter escort. Of roughly 71 aircraft committed that day, a majority were shot down by Flak and Luftwaffe fighters, among the worst single-day loss rates recorded by any RAF type in the war. Crews assigned to these missions knew beforehand from earlier sorties that week what their survival odds looked like, yet flew regardless because the bridgeheads had to be hit. The rear gunner's single Vickers gun offered no real defense against coordinated fighter attacks. After France fell, the type was withdrawn from daylight bombing entirely and relegated to training duty. Its service record a documented case study in how underpowering a multi-crew aircraft converts a tactical mission into a statistical near certainty of loss. Number 13. Renault R-35, France, 1936. Standard French infantry tank from 1936 onward, the Renault R-35 carried thick cast armor for its size, but short-barreled 37mm SA-18 gun, originally designed against fortifications and infantry rather than the newer, better-armored German tanks it would eventually face. Like the Char B-1 bis, it used a one-man turret, forcing the commander to load and aim the main gun personally, while also trying to track the surrounding battlefield through a small vision slit. Doctrinally, R-35 units were dispersed in small penny packet groups attached to infantry divisions rather than massed as a concentrated armored reserve, so when German panzer spearheads broke through in May 1940, individual R-35 platoons faced concentrated enemy armor with no support. Crew accounts describe the commander physically unable to traverse the turret, load a shell, and aim before an approaching panzer had already closed to effective range. Thousands of R-35s were captured largely intact during the collapse, later reissued by German occupation forces for garrison duty, a final irony for a tank meant to defend French territory. The R-35's failure traces less to the vehicle's metallurgy than to a doctrine that scattered armor, exactly where German operations were designed to concentrate and overwhelm it. Number 14. Schwerer Gustav Railway Gun, Germany, 1941. Completed in 1941 after years of development, the Schwerer Gustav was an 80 cm railway gun, the largest caliber artillery piece ever used in combat, built to destroy the heaviest fortifications in Europe, specifically the Maginot Line forts it was originally commissioned against. Technically, the gun's sheer scale, weighing over 1,300 tons and requiring a purpose-built dual rail track plus weeks of assembly by a crew of roughly 500 men, meant it could only be deployed where rail infrastructure and time allowed, a severe operational constraint for a weapon meant to support fast-moving campaigns. Practically, by the time it was ready for combat, the Maginot Line had already fallen in 1940 without needing it. So Gustav's only real combat use came at the Siege of Sevastopol in 1942, firing a limited number of enormous shells against Soviet fortifications at a cost, in manpower, transport, and time, wildly disproportionate to the damage inflicted compared to conventional siege artillery or aircraft. Crews assigned to the gun spent more time on rail logistics, camouflage against air attack, and assembly than on actual firing. Allied air superiority later in the war made moving something so large and slow increasingly dangerous. The Gustav's paperwork trail, immense cost and effort against a handful of firing missions, made it a monument to engineering ambition outpacing practical battlefield value. Number 15. Brewster F-2A Buffalo, United States, 1939. The Brewster F-2A Buffalo, entering Navy service in 1939, was America's first operational monoplane fighter, but production delays and quality control failures at Brewster's overcrowded Long Island factory, combined with successive rounds of added armor plate, self-sealing fuel tanks, and equipment, pushed the aircraft's weight well beyond its original design target without a corresponding increase in engine power. Technically, this left the Buffalo underpowered and sluggish in climb, and turn compared to the aircraft it would face in 1942. Practically, at the Battle of Midway in June 1942, Marine Corps Fighting Squadron 221 sent Buffaloes to intercept incoming Japanese strike aircraft. Pilot after-action reports describe being unable to outclimb or outturn A-6M0 fighters, with machine guns also prone to jamming during sustained high-G maneuvering. Of the Buffaloes that engaged that day, the large majority were shot down or damaged beyond repair, among the most lopsided single-engagement loss ratios of the Pacific War's early months. Surviving pilots described the aircraft as simply outclassed the moment battle was joined, regardless of pilot skill. The type was withdrawn from frontline American service within months, though Finnish export variants, lighter and better tuned, performed respectably elsewhere, underscoring that weight growth and manufacturing shortcuts, not the airframe concept itself, drove the Buffalo's American combat failure. Number 16. T-60 Light Tank, Soviet Union, 1941. Rushed into mass production in late 1941 as German forces drove toward Moscow. The T-60 mounted a 20mm SHVK autocannon, technically adequate against infantry and light vehicles, but incapable of penetrating the frontal armor of a Panzer III or IV at any realistic combat range. Factories evacuated east of the Urals prioritized the T-60 precisely because it was cheap and fast to build. Over 6,000 were produced, favoring quantity during a manpower and material crisis over genuine combat capability against German armor. Practically, Soviet tank crews thrown into the defense of Moscow found their autocannon fire simply failed to damage enemy tanks, while their own 15 to 20 mm plating offered minimal protection in return. Documented engagements during the winter 1941-42 counteroffensive show T-60 units suffering losses disproportionate to any damage inflicted on German armor, often destroyed in exchanges where the opposing tank sustained no meaningful harm. Crew morale reports from the period describe assignment to T-60 units as widely understood to carry high mortality risk given the vehicle's inability to either kill enemy tanks or survive their return fire. It remained useful mainly for reconnaissance and infantry support roles once its unsuitability against armor became undeniable, a wartime necessity built for output volume rather than battlefield survival. Number 17. Messerschmitt Me-163 Komet, Germany, 1944. Entering combat in 1944, the Me-163 Komet used a Walter HWK 109-509 rocket engine burning T-Stoff and C-Stoff, two fuels that were separately stable but violently, sometimes explosively, reactive if mixed through a fuel line leak or a hard landing. Technically, this gave the Komet an extraordinary climb rate, capable of reaching Allied bomber altitudes in under 3 minutes, far faster than any propeller interceptor. Practically, powered flight lasted only about 8 minutes before the engine had to be shut down, after which the aircraft became an unpowered glider descending through airspace still patrolled by Allied escort fighters, who quickly learned to wait for exactly this vulnerable phase. Landing was equally dangerous. The Komet touched down on a retractable skid rather than wheels, and any rough landing risked rupturing residual fuel and igniting the airframe with the pilot still inside. Documented losses show more Komets destroyed by fuel accidents, hard landings, and post-glide interceptions than by direct air combat. Pilots who volunteered for the program understood survival odds were poor independent of whether they ever engaged an enemy bomber. The Komet's speed solved the intercept problem technically while creating a fuel and glide phase vulnerability that, practically, killed nearly as many of its own pilots as it protected. Number 18. M3 Lee Grant, United States, 1941. Fielded in 1941 as an urgent stopgap while a proper turreted 75mm tank was still under development, the M3 Lee mounted its main 75mm gun in a hull sponson with limited traverse rather than a rotating turret, a technical compromise that forced crews to reposition the entire tank to bring the main gun to bear on a moving target. This layout also produced an unusually tall silhouette, over 3 meters, making the M3 easy for German gunners to spot and range in the open desert of North Africa well before the M3 could return fire. Crew accounts from the Gazala and First Alamein battles describe the slow, exposed process of maneuvering the whole vehicle just to aim, often costing precious seconds against faster-reacting German Panzer IIIs and IVs with turreted guns. Despite this, the M3 gave Allied forces their first tank able to match German main gun caliber before the Sherman arrived, and it performed real service through mid-1942. Tank crews nonetheless openly regretted its height and awkward aiming process, aware they frequently absorbed the first shot in an engagement rather than initiating it. It was withdrawn from frontline British and American service as soon as sufficient M4 Shermans arrived, remembered as a necessary but structurally compromised bridge design. Number 19, Nakajima Kei, 115 Tsurugi, Japan, 1945. Designed in 1945 as Japan's war situation collapsed, the Kei 115 Tsurugi was built explicitly as a dedicated kamikaze airframe, using non-strategic materials and a fixed, jettisonable undercarriage, since the pilot was never intended to land again after takeoff. Technically, engineers prioritize speed of mass production over aerodynamic refinement or pilot safety, and evaluation pilots who flew the type documented dangerously unstable handling, particularly during takeoff and low-speed flight, with the aircraft difficult to control even before an operational mission began. Practically, the war ended in August 1945 before large numbers could be deployed operationally, so most Tsurugi airframes never flew a combat mission at all, though the burden placed on the young pilots assigned to a machine built with no expectation of their return remained severe regardless of whether any aircraft actually launched. Ground crews and pilots understood the design as an admission of Japan's collapsing industrial capacity rather than a genuine tactical weapon, since resources for a more refined aircraft simply no longer existed. The Ki 115's documented test records, control and stability, flagged before any operational sortie, make it one of the clearest cases in the entire war of an aircraft whose failure was assumed from the outset, because its design never planned for the pilot's survival regardless of mission outcome. Number 20, Churchill Tank MKI, United Kingdom, 1941. Rushed into production in 1941 under invasion pressure, the Churchill MKI mounted a 2-pounder gun in its turret and an auxiliary 3-inch howitzer in the hull front, a technical compromise meant to combine anti-tank and infantry support firepower in one vehicle. Splitting the role weakened both, the 2-pounder lacked a useful high-explosive shell for infantry targets, and the howitzer had limited traverse. Mechanically, early gearboxes and engines proved unreliable under sustained combat load, a maintenance headache documented extensively in unit war diaries. The clearest practical failure came at Dieppe in August 1942, where many Churchills lost traction on the loose shingle beach and became immobilized within yards of landing, leaving crews to fight from stationary positions under German coastal gun and mortar fire. Of 58 Churchills landed at Dieppe, the overwhelming majority never left the beach. Crew accounts describe watching tracks spin uselessly while shells found their range. Against Panzer III and IV armor, the 2-pounder's shell also lacked adequate penetration at typical engagement ranges, leaving crews undergunned even when mobile. Later marks fixed the gun, tracks, and reliability issues, but the MKI's combat debut remains a documented example of doctrine and terrain analysis failing a vehicle before the enemy ever did. If there's a World War II weapon you think deserves a spot on this list, share it in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories about the failures, innovations, and forgotten weapons that shaped history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.